magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworld.eldar.com. I'm Brent, and this is the unit focus video on every elf's skull-faced daddy of death, Dark Reaper Phoenix Lord Maugan Ra. Now, before we dive in, I'd just like to go on record as saying Maugan Ra is a solidly B-list unit. I am not suggesting that you include Maugan Ra in your optimized tournament lists. He sadly does not have a place there. However, in more casual 40k, he's a lot of fun, but still not without his challenges. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what Maugan Ra is in terms of his role on the table, what he's sort of clearly statted for, how to use him most effectively, obstacles to using him effectively. How to use him effectively is actually mostly going to be about how to play around those obstacles, and options for two different ways to think about including him in a list. And we'll start with a look at his data card. So he has the standard Phoenix Lord stat line with a 7-inch move, toughness 3, 2-up save, 5 wounds, leadership 6, objective control 1, and that 4-up invulnerable save. His ranged weapon, the Maugater, or Maugater, I have no idea how that's pronounced, has a 36-inch range, 6 attacks, hits on 2s, strength 7, -1 AP, sad, flat 2 damage, devastating wounds, cool, and it ignores cover like the standard Reaper launcher. That same weapon has a melee stat line also, which is actually quite similar. In melee, it has 5 attacks, still hits on 2s, strength 6 instead of 7, but -2 instead of -1 AP, still flat 2 damage. In addition, Maugan Ra has 2 abilities of note. One is Harvester of Souls, so if you have him lead a unit of Dark Reapers, they hit on 2s instead of 3s. He gives them +1 to hit. This is especially good for the Tempest Launcher, which now is an indirect fire weapon that hits on 2s because it ignores, Reapers ignore modifiers. Although they do not ignore this modifier. I've seen a couple people argue occasionally that rules as written, Maugan Ra can't give +1 to Reapers because they ignore modifiers, but if you actually look at the data card, it says they can ignore any or all, which means they can choose to ignore some and not others, so obviously you don't choose to ignore this one. So they do in fact hit on 2s. There's no rules as written problem there. And then his last ability, Face of Death, gives him an advantage into targets that are below half strength. So either a squad with fewer than half the models left or a monster or vehicle that has less than half its wounds. You can reroll your hit roll and your hit rolls and your wound rolls against a target like that. Not with the whole squad, just with Maugan Ra, which it's great to reroll ones to hit. You already had a free 1 reroll from the detachment bonus, but the ability to reroll wound rolls is good because it means that he's actually decent into really tough things, that are below half strength. So he's got that strength 7, which isn't going to let you wound something that's toughness 12 easily. But if you're wounding a toughness 12 model on 5 up, but you're re-rolling all of the wounds because you've already gotten it down below half wounds with some bright lances or something, well, now it's actually decent, or it would be if the AP were better. So that's what you're getting for 130 points. If you have him lead an MSU Reaper squad, they're 80 points. So the whole thing then comes in at 210, the same cost currently as a Night Spinner. And it's really just not a bad little shooting package for 210 points, especially if you consider, if you're going to run them with the Reapers, especially if you consider that you have a 2d6 blast indirect fire weapon that can hit on 2s with strength 4 -1 AP for taking out objective holding chaff in your opponent's backfield. And then you have, between Maugan Ra and the other Reapers, you either have a pretty effective package of anti-heavy infantry fire. So if there are 4 Reapers in the squad plus Maugan Ra with his 10, or his 6 attacks, excuse me, you have 10 good anti-infantry attacks overall. The regular Reaper launcher, it's anti-heavy infantry profile with the flat 2 damage. The star shot profile is strength 8. It's only one shot. It ignores cover, minus 2 AP, doing flat 2 damage. So it's going to hit Marines with Maugan Ra leading the squad. It'll hit Marines on 2s. It'll wound them on 2s. And then minus 2 AP, flat 2 damage. If they fail their armor save on a 5-up, it then just flat out kills them on 2s. And then Maugan Ra himself, his 6 attacks are slightly crappier, which is kind of disappointing. But he's going to hit those Marines on 2s, wound them on 3s, because strength 7, not strength 8. And then only minus 1 AP, so half of them are going to save, but any failed save will kill a Marine. But that does mean that if he leads the squad of Reapers and you fire those 10 shots and you figure there's one reroll to hit and one reroll to wound, which ironically you're definitely using on the Reapers, not Maugan Ra, because they hit harder, you should just about pretty much be able to wipe a squad of 5 Marines. Maybe there's one left. While the Exarch is doing some probably not inconsiderable damage to some chaff unit in your opponent's backfield. Probably not wiping it out unless it's like a 5-elf Cabalite squad or something, but doing some damage over 2 turns, wiping it out. So one of the things I do in these videos is I talk about a unit's role on the table. So Maugan Ra, regardless of whether or not he's leading that 5-elf squad of Reapers, his role on the table is anti-heavy infantry. He's infantry and bike elimination. He's very effective into stuff that's 2 wounds. That's like his primary role. And then his secondary role is he's pretty good against putting some finishing work on a much tougher target that's already below half strength. So he can finish off like an enemy Forge Fiend or something equivalent to that still has 3 or 4 wounds left and you don't want to blow another Bright Lance on it. Or he might be able to finish it off. That minus 1 AP makes it sort of touch and go, even with ignores cover. So let's talk for a minute about what makes Maugan Ra, why Maugan Ra is a B-list unit and why he can be kind of hard actually to use effectively. The first issue really is that minus 1 AP. I'm baffled by that. The notion that it's actually worse than the Reaper, the standard, his like relic Phoenix Lord version of the Reaper weapon is objectively worse than the Reaper weapon. I guess it's maybe kind of more like a Shuriken cannon, which Reapers can also tote around, and it's better than a Shuriken cannon. So maybe that's really what it is. It's a better version of the Shuriken cannon. But regardless, it's not it. Minus 1 AP is not great because anything that you're targeting with Maugan Ra is going to have pretty good armor, right? So he's going to stand a pretty good chance of saving against him. And while the rerolls with devastating wounds against something that's below half strength are good, it's definitely not enough to make this like a unit of notable shooting consideration. Maugan Ra's shooting is more in line with like the extra couple of Shuriken cannons you have on your fire prisms or something in the late game than it is a unit that you would really think about as a particularly valuable shooting unit. And at 130 points, that's tough to swallow. He really needs to have another AP or maybe do flat 3 damage or just have more abilities, sustained hits. And part of what hurts here is that he compares so very poorly with the Death Jester, which does a very similar job. And if you get give the Death Jester Fate's Messenger, he's still cheaper than Maugan Ra, has slightly more limited range, but puts out like if you use the Fate's Messenger trick that I talk about in my Death Jester video, he puts out half again as many shots and is just better and is also a lone operative, so it's hard to kill. Like the Death Jester does Maugan Ra's job much better than Maugan Ra does it for fewer points, and that's why he's never going to make it into one of the reasons why he's never going to make it into an optimized competitive list. Hopefully when the Codex comes out, he'll get some kind of little boost. I would love it if more of the Phoenix Lords had that like Fugan style resurrection power. A little bit of recursion on these characters makes them much more viable. And one of the reasons that Fugan is almost the only one that ever sees any play is that recursion ability. So two other issues with Maugan Ra. One, the other one is that he struggles to synergize a little bit with the Reapers because he has a 36-inch range and they have a 48-inch range. And one of the best things about the Reapers is their 48-inch range. It's not like he would have been OP if he'd had the same range as the Reapers. It's kind of weird that he doesn't. So your Reapers actually need to be closer to the fight if you're going to be able to shoot with Maugan Ra, and if they're closer to the fight, well, now it's much harder to keep them alive because with the change to the rules to Phantasm, it's harder to hide them. And so one of the ways that your Reapers stay alive, if you're going to run Reapers, is to just outrange the opponent, and they can't really do that if Maugan Ra needs to be in this, or if Maugan Ra's in the squad and he needs to be able to shoot 2 for the squad to be worth it, and he definitely needs to be able to shoot 2 for the squad to be worth it. You do not spend more than the value of the squad to give the squad +1 to hit. If you want more Reaper fire, don't spend 130 points on Maugan Ra, spend 80 more points and get more Reapers. Lastly, there's an issue with the way so presumably when GW designs a data card and they assign point values, there are there's some amount of points that goes to a certain amount of killing power in melee and in ranged attack potential. And we are buying, when we buy Maugan Ra, a model that is almost as good at melee combat as it is at shooting, which is okay, except that what you end up with is a model that doesn't really excel at either. Maugan Ra is not like a great shooting threat for 130 points, and he's kind of a mediocre melee threat. But in order to get his value, arguably you kind of have to be using him for both. And that's hard because he's definitely not going to be much of a melee threat if he's running with your Reapers. I mean, yes, he can like guard your Reapers. So if anything tries to wipe them out in melee, Maugan Ra's there. But is that really worth 130 points? I'm not sure that it is. Okay, so we'll talk briefly about how to play around some of these potential problems. So there are two ways to run Maugan Ra. One is to stick him in a unit of Reapers, and the other is to run him just as a character running around on its own. And if you're going to do the second one, I think you want to put him in a Falcon. The advantage to doing the second one is that if he's not running around with the Reapers, you can use him as both a shooting and a melee character. And if he's in a Falcon, he can travel. The Falcon is probably already in your list for some other reason. So let's say you've got some Fire Dragons. And sometimes what happens in lists that want to run Fire Dragons is you have like 2 or 3 Falcons, and one Falcon has 5 Fire Dragons and, say, Fugan in it, and the other Falcon has 5 Fire Dragons in it. And there's a slot left over, and you could stick Maugan Ra in there, and that would expand the threat profile of the contents of the Falcon and give you this other thing you can do. And if you can hold him back until the late game, Maugan Ra struggles a little bit as a midfield lone operative because he doesn't do enough damage to be really scary, and he's just not that durable. The 2-up armor save is great, especially in cover, but if he gets into melee with anything with good AP and multi-damage, well, he's just going to get killed pretty quick. It just isn't that hard to kill a Phoenix Lord that doesn't have lone operative and doesn't have recursion with toughness 3 and a 4-up involvement, 5 wounds. But if you hold him back till the late game, right, and there are certain types of unit that are especially good in the late game. I've talked about, in other videos, I've talked about getting aggressive in the late game with a Death Jester, with a Solitaire, even with your Autarch Way Leaper. Once your opponent is down to the Triarii, it becomes much, much easier to make these sort of medium damage to output, somewhat fragile characters that are good against small arms fire effective. Another thing that you can do, if you're going to run them in a unit of Reapers, one of the biggest obstacles to running Reapers effectively right now is their quite mediocre AP. And then sort of hilariously and tragically, Maugan Ra has even worse AP than the Reapers. So the Reapers on their anti-hard target profile still only have -2 AP. They ignore cover, but it's still only -2 AP. So really tough stuff is still going to be saving on a 4-up with no invuln, and stuff with pretty good armor is still going to be saving on a 5-up, and they don't have crazy volume of shots. Each one is only shooting once, so it's just not. It doesn't really get there. So one option is to get them on the 3rd floor of a building to get plunging fire. Because once Reapers and Maugan Ra have plunging fire in combination with the ability to ignore cover, they're pretty good into most armored targets. Now, this was a really solid way to play Maugan Ra up until relatively recently, because of the changes to Phantasm. Like, so what you would have done before is you put the Reapers on an opaque 2nd floor of a ruin, and on your turn, you move them up to the 3rd floor, and they all shoot a thing, and then at the end of your opponent's movement phase, you Phantasm them back down to the 2nd floor. And now there's the dice roll for that, and probably you fail, and they just get stuck out in the open, and then, they save on a... Maugan Ra himself saves on a 2-up plus cover, and then the Reapers have a pretty decent armor, but certainly nothing that's going to keep them alive against dedicated enemy fire, and they are relatively expensive. So you could use Fire and Fade. If you really, in a casual game, if you were like, my thing in this game is going to be Maugan Ra and my Reapers, you could run Maugan Ra with 10 Reapers and rely on Fire and Fade to guarantee. And if you move them up to the 2nd floor of a ruin, you would get plunging fire. Or the 3rd floor of a ruin, you get plunging fire with the whole squad. You might not be able to give them all plunging fire, but the rules for plunging fire do not require that every model in the unit be able to utilize it for it to work. So even if the 3rd floor of the ruin is only big enough to get some of your Reapers up there, you can get some of the Reapers up there, and at least part of the squad. Ideally, the whole squad would get it. And if you have 10 Reapers that are hitting on 2s, because Maugan Ra's in there, plus Maugan Ra, plus the plunging fire, that's decent. It's not tournament list decent, but if you wanted to build a thematic list, maybe an Altansar list, around the notion that Maugan Ra and 10 Reapers are like the narrative anchor point, both tactically and narratively for the list, that would be the way to do it, and it would probably work reasonably well. But you need an autarch, and you are blowing 2 CP every turn on this big anchor unit of a Phoenix Lord plus 10 Reapers, and they're still not going to be amazing, but they'll be pretty good. Now, alternatively, if you're running a smaller unit of Reapers, you can still kind of poke them out from behind an obscuring piece of terrain, and still use Phantasm, right? Like a squad of 5 Reapers plus Maugan Ra, you just poke a little bit of Maugan Ra out from behind the ruin. He's like, you can probably set it up so that the whole squad definitely, even on a 1, can Phantasm out of line of sight. Maybe you need a 2, but you'll probably be obscured from at least most of your opponent's army, and you would definitely have cover. So that would be the other way to do it. If he's leading a smaller unit of Reapers, and then maybe in the late game, you actually bring Maugan Ra and the Reapers out, and they get a little bit aggressive in the midfield, because Reaper shooting is not so good that this would really be an issue, with the notion that maybe you are going to charge something and get into melee with Maugan Ra and carve it up in the last, like, done turn 5 or something. It would be, if there was still some way to give the Reaper autarch, the Reaper Exarch Web of Skulls. Do you remember the old Web of Skulls from 2nd edition? It's like this Reaper melee weapon. Then maybe this would work a little better, but like, it would be fine. It would certainly a viable, interesting, different play strategy for casual games. Lastly, if you are going to run Maugan Ra on his own, other than putting him in a Falcon or running him with the Reapers, the other option, of course, is to just start him in reserve. Now, one of the nice things about starting a single character model in reserve is that when you're bringing it onto the board, you don't need that much space. It's hard to screen a single small base model effectively, and it's easy with the 36-inch range to bring him in range of a good target. The problem, of course, is that then there's no way to keep him safe from retaliation. And as we've already established, he's not that durable. So this is a thing that you would want to do definitely judiciously in a more casual game, with the idea that you're probably bringing him in maybe as late as turn 3, and then he's going to get aggressive in the midfield. Because again, to really get his value, either he has to be buffing probably a larger squad of Reapers, or he's and still close enough to shoot, so the whole Reaper squad has to be closer, or you have to be, if he's running on his own, you have to be able to use both his shooting and his melee profile. And in that situation, he's really only viable as a later game unit. Personally, I would prefer to have him come out of the Falcon, because if he's coming out with fire dragons, he's got some diversity. Also, the ability on the Falcon, fire support that lets you reroll wound rolls for units that came out of the Falcon that are targeting something that the Falcon itself targeted. Well, rerolling wound rolls, as we've already established, with a Strength 7 weapon is actually really good. Strength 7 is significantly better than Strength 6, because now the stuff that's T12 and up, and T12 is like that's kind of the benchmark for a durable model. The difference between wounding on 6s and wounding on 5s is 100%. You're hitting 100% more. Excuse me, you're wounding 100% more. So that's really solid. And also, rerolling wound rolls, of course, has good synergy with devastating wounds, with which Maugan Ra does have in the shooting phase. So you can stick Maugan Ra and a Falcon with some fire dragons, or maybe in a casual play with banshees. I kind of really like banshees coming out of Falcons, and that's cool too, because they're charging. He potentially wants to charge, so it would be positioned for melee to make use of the rerolls and also to get into position. But in that case, it's probably a late game play. Same thing with bringing him in from reserves, or alternatively, you can actually have him lead the Reapers, either a unit of 5 that's going to stay behind terrain and rely on Phantasm. Again, not optimal, but I think that's how you do it. And then possibly actually get aggressive in the late game with the notion that maybe they could blow something off an objective with melee, or run the big squad. But if you're running the big squad at that point, I really do think you're including the Autarch and spending the 2 CP on fire and fade. And in order to make that really optimal, you need to get the plunging fire, at least with some of the models in the unit. Highly narrative pick. Definitely cool for an Altan Sar list, but certainly not something you're going to do in a tournament game. So that's what I've got. Maugan Ra, gorgeous model. And by the way, if you're looking at mine thinking, oh wow, Brent, not only do you know stuff, but you sure can paint. I did not paint that. That's a commission job by Bob Fry, who I've mentioned before. Bob builds better on Instagram. His work is beautiful. And if, like me, you're looking for opportunities to use this very pretty, somewhat underutilized model on the table, I think you've got some options. If you have your own options or your own ideas, about how to use Maugan Ra effectively in casual play or even pseudo-competitive play, I hope you'll leave those in the comments below. If you want to help my algorithm, you could just say, hey, algorithm, what's up? Please like the video if you like the video. And should you be thinking to yourself, the time has come for me to finally become a patron and patronize Brent, who keeps making these videos that I keep watching, I would love for you to do that. And you could join us over on Discord, and that would be fun too. Now, I know I promised a couple of weeks ago that I was working on a video broadly for beginning Eldari players. I'm still working on that. I was hoping to have it for last week, but work got crazy, and I was hoping to have it for this week, but life got crazy. So I'm still working on that. And thank goodness last week somebody in the comments said, hey, would you do a video on Maugan Ra? And that was like low hanging fruit. So here you go, random commenter, internet person, your Maugan Ra video. I obviously can't do what everyone asks for every week, because there are always multiple requests for different things, and my actual patrons over on Discord want stuff too. So don't feel hard done by if your suggestion wasn't the one. I always read all of the suggestions. I really appreciate them. I write down ones that I haven't thought of before. I'm definitely listening to you. And so I hope you will keep letting me know what you most want to see. That's it. That's what I've got. Hope to be back again soon with new content, notably including that beginners video. Until then, best of luck with your pointy ears.